Welcome to Black Hat Briefings, held November 21st through the 22nd, 2001 in Amsterdam. This is videotape number 6, One-Way SQL Hacking, Futility of Firewalls in Web Hacking.
I'm glad to be here in Amsterdam as well. I'll introduce this talk, what we're going to talk about. The title of our talk is One-Way Hacking and the Futility of Firewalls. What we want to stress about are how web attacks taking shape today and how can seemingly insignificant holes be widened further and attacked to the fullest. People believe sometimes that restrictive firewalls or restrictive settings can stop these things, and that certain programming mistakes can be tolerated. What we want to illustrate is that it's not true. Speaking with me today is going to be J.D. Glasser, who's the Director of Engineering at Foundstone. Please welcome J.D. out here. J.D. has been helping me a lot with the research that we do at Foundstone in both technical as well as cheering and moral terms. He's a great friend as well. And I am currently the Director of India Operations for Foundstone, mainly focusing into web research and vulnerabilities, and trying to have a good time. So let's jump through this demo. We have some slides, but most important are going to be the demos that we have. And hopefully, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, all these demos will work and not bomb on us at the last minute. So let's start from the beginning, see how web applications are set up and how they're made of. And then we'll go and see what sort of vulnerabilities can be taken advantage of, and how to keep on widening these and probing deeper and deeper. So I'll begin with this slide. What we have here is a typical e-commerce setup. Most web rollouts are designed in this manner. You have a web server which acts as a front end, which receives all the HTTP requests from the browsers that are out there. In front of the web server, usually we have a firewall just restricting enough access to the websites as needed, blocking out all unnecessary traffic. If a website is not just serving static HTML pages and is actually involved in hosting a web application or doing dynamic stuff, you will have certain other servers which interface with the web server. They might either reside on the same host, might be a plugin to the main web server, or they might be standalone servers themselves. And these would actually keep running the application and interface with the web server. Powering the application, more often than not, we find a backend database where all the data is stored and retrieved. You can have databases for many purposes. Typically, most of these databases will be SQL databases today. And there'll be some sort of an interfacing mechanism with the application system and the database to exchange data. Next slide. When we talk about attacks, I've been attending at Black Hat since 1999 and then begun to speak at it. I've seen that people have focused more from general network attacks, OS attacks, and are going very specifically into just talking about web attacks. Now, why is this? Over the years, a lot of OS and network platforms have matured sufficiently, both from stopping the same mistakes happening over and over again. Although some companies don't tend to learn, we know. Other cases, people know that their network is insecure. They have a lot of services open. They have unnecessary stuff that is being exposed. But they do a very good job in securing it by putting appropriate perimeter defenses, saying, okay, sure, my NT RPC is open, but if I put a firewall for those ports, they won't be accessible. So you're seeing firewalls being used in most rollouts. A lot of maturity has gone into coding practices for OS and network services. Next slide. Well, what firewalls can do for us are stop all unnecessary services which are not needed and help us enforce the principle of least privilege. Next. They also stop access to systems that are not supposed to be accessed directly from the public network. For example, these backend web app servers or DB servers, they don't need to be accessed. So, so traffic is cut off for these. Next one. And they also sometimes do a very good job in filtering out outbound traffic. Now, most firewalls that I've seen on the field configured for a company, they are very generous as far as outbound traffic is allowed. They just say, okay, the rule is incoming traffic is bad, but outbound traffic that has actually originated inside is fine. Well, that was also proven that that's not indeed the case. Bad traffic is bad traffic, period. It doesn't matter where it originates from. So we can configure firewalls to prevent outbound access. For example, if somebody has hacked up a web server and is trying to launch an XTerm connection back, now why would a web server need to initiate an outbound connection to port 6000? That's not needed, so it should be blocked. Next slide. So far we've seen what firewalls can do for us and what the restrictions are. But here's something that firewalls cannot help us with. For example, e-commerce or web traffic is still perceived as normal, good, friendly traffic. Web traffic is not restricted because, a simple reason, people want other customers to come to their website and use their web applications. So HTTP has to go through, it has to be allowed. People also have this perception that web traffic is friendly traffic. I mean, I've asked this question to many people saying, what's more dangerous, port 80 open or port 139 open on an NT server? Or port 80 open on a Unix box or 111 open on a Unix box? And that there's no direct answer to this. If you say that, okay, RPC services are bad, well, a misconfigured web server can be as bad as well. Actually, it can be worse because a firewall will let it through. So content and application-based attacks are still perceived to be very rare, and people still don't fully understand what can go wrong and how bad it can be. Next slide. So what does the modern web hacker need? I mean, Zen and the art of web hacking is very, very simple tools, simple yet elegant, and that's why I love web attacks. All you need is a browser, a clear mind, and an internet connection. So there you are. You have very simple tools. You can pull off very powerful tricks with those. Some of the attacks that can occur on web servers are, if a web server is misconfigured, you can force URLs which can be decoded or misinterpreted in certain ways to cause anomalous effects. Next slide. Then you can have a badly written web application. Somebody just wrote up a site in a great hurry and they wanted functionality first, security later. And there might be lack of proper checking, lack of proper stateful checking, lack of proper validation, and the web app itself can break and cause you trouble. Next slide. Or you can have vulnerabilities at the database interface point. Like, how does the web application use a database? And there might be lack of checking or lack of tightening at those connectors, and the effects can be bad as well. Next. And last but not least, there are HTTP session hijacking attacks or session spoofing attacks, especially for applications that maintain sessions for their users. This happens because HTTP was not designed to be a stateful protocol in the first place. It was just meant for information dissemination. And bringing statefulness to HTTP is always a very clumsy job. You can use either you can use cookies, or you can use server-side session variables, you can use hidden fields. All of these, if they're not properly done, can be taken advantage of in one way or the other. So whereas you can log in as your own user, your own ID, and then play tricks with the URL or the HTTP inputs and switch over your credentials to those of some other user on the same system. Next slide. I'd like to picture the URL as some sort of a cruise missile. Every part of the URL gets picked up and gets interpreted by different components of this whole system. For example, the first part, HTTP, the first point of striking is the firewall, and firewall says, okay, your web traffic, please pass. Your SSL traffic, oh wow, even better, it's supposed to be secure anyway. Then comes the part where the server and the resource is actually accessed. If some tampering is done in that area, and if the web server is misconfigured, this part of the URL can adversely affect the web server. If the application itself the application resource itself, when it is pulled out, gets processed by the application handlers, and if there's any problems in those areas, they affect the web application components. Applications typically take in parameters and arguments that are either parts of fill-out forms or stuff that is necessary for user interaction. And if these inputs sent by the user are played with or are tampered or poisoned, that effect is directly felt upon the application server. And as we go deeper and deeper, some parameters might actually make it all the way to the database query. So tampering or poisoning those things will cause the effect to be felt at the backend database. So there you have a URL. Depending on what part you insert your attack in, it will actually detonate at various parts within your territory. So you launch one, and you say, okay, this time I wanted to hit the backend DB server. So you play around with the latter part. This time I wanted to hit the application server. So you play around with the earlier part, things like that. And more often than not, people forget how bad this can be. Just to give you an example, we were involved in an attack and penetration exercise. It was a big stockbroker in New York, and they had all their servers, all their IIS servers hosting the application, guarded by Netscape Enterprise servers. These Netscape Enterprise boxes were acting as proxies, front-end proxies. Their main pages were being served from the Netscape servers, and they had mappings for certain URL parts to the backend IIS machines. And they had checkpoint firewalls at the front end. So their argument was, well, whatever problems IIS has are filtered out by the Netscape boxes. All other traffic is filtered out by the firewall. And actually, we were able to hit this server with a single URL with using the Unicode bug. We managed to bounce through the Netscape proxy server, change the virtual root, hit the target backend server, IIS, and actually run commands on their internal 10.0.1 network, and that was game over. And there, they had absolutely nothing they could do. So this is how bad URL attacks can be. Next slide. What kind of stuff do attackers gather from web attacks? Well, first and foremost, they can gather extra path information or extra system information. Sometimes environment variables are leaked, physical path mappings are leaked, configuration parameters for web applications are leaked, like session variables. If you go further, more devastating attacks are actually source code disclosure attacks, where the application itself does not execute, but the source of the application is returned back in raw format. So the attacker can actually study the whole application, figure out where the holes are, and then take advantage of the specific holes. One can also have attacks in the form of extra data disclosure. These are specifically database attacks, where you tamper with a SQL query or a parameter that gets passed in a SQL query, extend the SQL query, and get more information than what you're supposed to see. Getting more information is also fine. You can also insert more information. That's where it gets really dangerous. And last but not least, the worst kind of attacks are arbitrary command execution, where you can run commands on the remote web server sitting from your browser. Next slide. Tools that a web hacker needs a port scanner, just to check for web ports, no need of fancy tricks. I love Netcat. Actually, I want shirts saying, I love NC. If somebody can make those and mail them to me, that would be cool. Sometimes you do need a vulnerability checker like Whisker or something to probe for known web vulnerabilities. However, I've given up probing for known web vulnerabilities. My great thrill is in trying to attack web applications itself and see where they go wrong. If you're trying to deal with SSL servers, tools like OpenSSL or S-Tunnel or SSL proxy, they can help you connect using SSL sockets. And the whole thing that, wow, we use 128-bit crypto, therefore we are secure, is completely defeated. Next slide. So here's an example of what we did. I think this was in April 2000. We whipped up a quick 3-line SSL proxy using Netcat and OpenSSL. And what you do is you target your attack at the Netcat listener, and these things get tunneled over the SSL connection. Next slide. What happens when you can actually lay your hands on the source code? Why is source code disclosure very dangerous? Is you can actually now stand to gain how the whole application is designed and where the sensitive parts are and what areas you can take advantage of. You can get application configuration files, say the properties file for an application, or most web apps these days make use of XML configuration files. If you can pull out those web.inf directories, then you can figure out how the whole application is laid out. You can get database passwords, you can get backend areas which are not directly linked to the page, things like that. Next slide. Here's an example of a WebLogic disclosure attack. Let's skip over that. IIS suffers from similar bugs. Next one. As far as SQL attacks go, SQL query poisoning attacks go, here's an example of how SQL attacks can go wrong. I mean, how SQL queries can go wrong. And this is an example taken from an ASP page where not enough input validation, or let me rephrase it, no input validation is being performed on the parameters received into this page. Over here, the line that is highlighted in bold is actually the SQL query. And it says that select star from product where ID is equal to, and then it is concatenated with whatever value is passed from the parameter string ID. So this value that is given in the variable ID goes unchecked into the SQL query. You can actually tack along more SQL statements and extend this, and these would get executed. Next slide. Some examples of this are, well, if you have, let's actually cut over to the demo. We'll pause the slides over here, just take a look at some demo stuff. So what we want to do is just pull out a couple of web pages. There's one server called 10.0.4.11. This is running IIS on Win 2000. Also, it is hosting a web application. So JD is going to just drive through. Here's a site that sells you pictures online. If you click on one of these pictures, it brings up details of the picture. You can go back and take another picture or something.
I drew this with mine.
You drew this with? Okay. Okay, and just open up another browser. We have another server that's running Unix. That's on 10.0.4.3. It's a site hosted on Apache, and it's also pretty much on the same lines. And there, if you click on some pages, you'll get similar stuff. We're going to use these two examples in our demo to illustrate how can we attack. How can you do one-way hacks on Unix servers? How can we do one-way hacks on Win 2000 servers? So now, just go to the browser for a short time. Okay, go to that other one, the Windows one. Okay, click on some picture. Yeah. Notice in the URL it says the following. It says http 10.0.4.11/showtable.asp. Now, showtable.asp is the interactive application. And then it has arguments, ID is equal to 1. Now, assuming that this thing is being powered by a backend SQL server, this is how an attacker would think. First thing, it's showtable.asp. So this must be an IIS server using ASP applications. Second is, when you notice things like ID is equal to 1, 2, 3, or 4, and similar pages coming back, chances are that this stuff is coming from a backend database. So now we can figure that, okay, this parameter ID is equal to 1 is going to be a part of a SQL query somewhere within showtable.asp. And now if we just think that, okay, if a mistake has been made at this point, we can try and extend the SQL query. So we can just tack along extra stuff at the SQL query and get more results. Okay. So just a sec. Just wanted to make sure. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So just jump over to the slide. Yeah, slide. No, back by one. Okay, so if we give a URL like this, showtable.asp, id is equal to 3 or 1 is equal to 1. Now, how would this translate into the SQL query? As follows, it's saying select star from product where id is equal to 3 or 1 is equal to 1. Now that 1 is equal to 1 will be always true, and anything ORed with a true value will also be true. So you'll effectively get all the rows returned. So that's what JD is going to do. He's just going to type showtable.asp plus or 1 is equal to 1. And when he does that, you notice that instead of 1 row, 4 rows got returned. And this way we can know that the SQL query can be further extended and things can be inserted in. We'll take examples of those as we go along. Just go back to the slide. Next one. Now you can be a bit more vengeful and try queries like instead of getting all rows back, you just say drop table and the whole table would disappear if the database user had enough privileges. Next slide. Or you can, if you know some stored procedures at the back end of the database, you can stand to execute arbitrary commands. For example, on SQL Server, you have a stored procedure called xp_command shell. If you have enough privileges, if the web app has enough privileges to invoke it, you can achieve arbitrary command execution through a single URL. Let's go to the browser. Now just go to the Unix side. Let's look at some attack examples on this scenario. Just click on one of the pictures. Notice over here how the URL changes. If you can't read, I'll just read it out to you. When JD is clicked on a picture, the URL becomes 10.0.4.3/index.cgi, and the arguments that are sent to this URL are page is equal to tahoe1.shtml. This picture was actually taken right outside Tim Mullen's window. Kidding, because he lives in Tahoe. He lives in Tahoe. Now, just go back and click on another page. Oh. That takes skills, brother. Okay. Over here, you see the page is changed. It becomes monterey.shtml. So what an attacker can figure out is, okay, this script, index.cgi, might be taking arguments, which are actually files on the system, and just displaying the contents of these files in this nice and pretty template. Now, what if there is no checking done on what kind of file is being pulled out? And we can try and do that. Instead of saying page is equal to monterey.shtml, let's try page is equal to index.cgi. We're trying to make index.cgi pull itself out. So that's what JD is going to do. Say type index.cgi, hit enter, and voila. We have the source code of index.cgi thrown back because of a carelessness in the way application was designed. Now if you can read the application further, I mean we read the script further, just do a view source. Yeah. Now if you read this, notice that there's nothing fancy in this script. All it does is takes the file name, attaches it to user local Apache htdocs, and just opens the file and pulls everything out, throws back the contents with a little bit of formatting. So now, since there is no check done on what kind of file can be pulled out, we can retrieve arbitrary files. So just close this window and try and pull out page is equal to, say, .. etc password. There you have it below. So we can aim this at any page and get any files pulled out. Now trust me, this is a very trivial example that I've used, but all the stuff that I present to you is stuff that I've seen on the field. I mean, this is how we've done our research and this is how we learn. when we do our attack and penetration engagements, we learn how applications can be badly designed, and some can be very badly designed. So here we have an example of pulling out the etc password file. If we study the Perl code a little bit more, we know that Perl uses the open system call, or the open function, in a very loose and flexible manner. I mean, if you add a pipe character to the file, Perl will actually treat the file name as a command, run the command, and give you the results of the command. So now instead of page is equal to etc password, if we do page is equal to pipe ls, and just try and get ls minus la. Yeah, that's fine. So what JD is going to do is do a recursive file listing. And now in the browser, we get thrown back the complete file listing. Let's do a view source. So from a simple vulnerability, we could extend it from retrieving the source to retrieving arbitrary files to running arbitrary commands. And now we know, we see all these files in the list. We can figure out where some sensitive files are or where some unprotected directories might be. Let's see. Okay. Let's just run a couple of, let's try and see what privileges we have. So instead of running ls minus la, just try the command id. Yeah, pipe. Yeah. When we run id, we get the results. Well, we are nobody. UID is 99, GID is 99. This is because the CGI script is running under the privileges of the Apache process, the HTTPD process, and this thing runs as nobody. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Now what we want to focus upon, we just showed you some examples of command execution and database attacks. What we want to focus upon is one-way hacking. And somebody had laid out a challenge to me in late 99, and by April 2000 I had perfected the art of one-way hacking. The challenge was that there is no outbound access. The firewalls are the most restrictive part. I mean, they are configured in the most restrictive manner. Only HTTP requests are allowed in, requests such as get and post, and only valid HTTP replies are allowed out. And given this, what can we do? Well, we can do a lot. We just want to show you how. Next slide. Now, what is required for one-way hacking? This is the anatomy of a one-way hack. We require just one entry point. The entry point should be an arbitrary command execution bug. Now, these are not difficult to find if the application is poorly written or the web server is not patched or the web server configuration is flawed. The IIS Unicode double decode bug works great on Windows servers. You can have a buffer overflow attack to achieve the same effect, or you can have things that fool the application itself, like the SQL exec command shell thing. Next slide. What we also want are write privileges onto some directories owned by the web application. Chances are that if a web application is interactive and stores temporary data somewhere within the whole web application directory, you will find certain writable areas. And most areas should not be writable, but if you're storing interactive data being thrown out from the user, you will need some temporary scratch space. We don't mind if the process runs as nobody or iUser or IWAM. That is immaterial for one-way hacking. Next slide. Now, once we have arbitrary command execution, what can we do? We can pilfer data from the target machine, learn how the website is laid out. We can discover further network information on the back end. And if we can run arbitrary commands and somehow access the shell, we can actually create files on the target system. We can stand to create application pages. For example, if we get hold of the Unicode bug, we can run the echo command using command.exe and use echo greater than file name and recreate ASP pages on the target server. Yes, you have a question at the back.
Yeah, but if you have already writable directories in the web server, you can also maybe simply upload your files through a feedback formula or whatever, something like that.
Your question is, the question is, if you have a writable directory on the web server, you can also upload your stuff using what? I couldn't figure out.
Yeah. If you have forms that interact with the user where you can type in your name and what information you want to receive or whatever, then you can put in your code there, maybe load it up, and you have it already in the file system, you just have to execute it.
Right, now that is possible. That scenario is possible on certain cases. His comment was, if you can write, if the web application writes to certain files, you can upload your code straight away over there. In some cases it works. In some cases, if the file format or the file structure is not appropriate, we can upload our stuff, but we can't run it. What we want is clean execution. Next slide. Okay. Now, what we're going to do for uploading our stuff is, if we can run commands like echo and recreate files, we can actually make a backend page that receives the data that we want to upload in the form of HTTP multi-part MIME uploads, the same stuff that you use when you attach attachments to web-based mail. All that stuff is over HTTP post, and the content type is multi-part MIME. This way, you can create an uploader and then just upload all the tools onto the website, just one-way stuff. So let's just see some examples of those. The next slide says what we're going to do next is install a remote web-based command prompt. Now, once we have upload capabilities, we can write some more application scripts, ASP, CGI, whatever they may be, Java server pages, and upload them to run shell commands. Okay, just cut to the browser. What we're going to do now is following. Hang on, I'm just going to narrate the steps. Okay, go to the Unix, the NT server. Yeah, there you are. And over here, let's run the Unicode vulnerability. We try 10.0.4.11/scripts /winnt %c0%af. I'm just using Unicode as an example. I know it's old, but just to illustrate a point of how remote commands execution takes place. cmd.exe, and just do !/c/c plus dir. Oh, plus. No, not equal to dir, plus dir. Hit enter. Okay, so here we sent a command using the Unicode vulnerability, the dir command, and got the results of the directory thrown back in the browser. What we're going to do is try and use this to recreate web pages on the target machine. I have a file. Just pull up that file in Notepad. A file called create that one. Hang on. Demo. Create, yeah, that one. Create 404 command echo. This file has 20 lines. Each one is an echo command. It echoes stuff into a file called c.asp. Now, if you run these 20 lines, one after the other using Unicode, we'll have created a file called c.asp on the target system. So instead of running it all through the browser, I've written a little Perl script that just opens a socket, does an HTTP post, throws all the 20 lines at one time, and comes back. So let's just do that. Go to the DOS prompt and post. you try doing just post cmd.pl. No, post cmd.pl. Post cmd.pl. Post underscore cmd. It's okay. We've both had very long nights. We're very tired, so forgive us. HTTP. I'm sorry? Yeah, I made it up. I make these things up as I go. Okay. HTTP 10.0.4.11 /scripts /.% no, yeah, %af .winnt system32 /cmd.exe. Okay, hit enter. What this script does is just opens up an HTTP socket, waits for the user input. Whatever input you type, it makes an HTTP post request, posts it, and throws you back the result. So we're just going to type dir, then next line, let's type set, and then enter, and do Control Z. Control Z, and input, yeah. So once we do that, we get all the results thrown back. I'll just scroll up a little. Okay, we gave two commands. We gave directory and we gave set. Both of these were executed by command shell. They actually go to command.exe's standard input, and they're separated by carriage return, so they run one after the other. And if this script is given a file name, and then it runs, it takes one line from the file name, posts it, and let's do that. Instead of just do up arrow. Instead of post cmd, we'll do post unicode. It's the same script, but takes a file name as an argument. And at the end, give create underscore 404 cmd underscore echo .txt. Okay, hit it. So once I run this, it takes a single HTTP post to recreate a file called c.asp. And now we just pull up c.asp from here. It didn't work? Just scroll down all the way. That's actually my disguise. I throw in a 404 error message, so the stupid admin that looks at it will just go away. And all the stuff is... And all the stuff, all the goodies are hidden at the bottom. So now just type, who am I? You're a user, you're nobody. Try ipconfig /all. Okay. And you get all the results thrown back into your web page. So now you have a semi-interactive web-based command prompt with disguises. So actually it gets even worse. I did a form which does not have that input bar at the bottom. But if you know the URL parameter, you can just tack it on using $, c is equal to whatever. And that way you don't even see a font. It's just flat 404 message. Anyway, I shouldn't teach you all these tricks, should I? The next stuff what we're going to do is, similarly, the same way we created c.asp, we'll create a file called upload.asp, which will allow us to do the HTTP multi-part MIME uploads. So just go to the command prompt. And instead of create 404 echo, we will use create underscore all underscore echo .txt. Just hit it. And now, once we run this, we'll have created a file called upload.asp. Upload.asp is around 300 lines, but I've shortened it down to only 5 HTTP post requests, so it won't create a lot of noise as far as HTTP traffic goes. Post can take up to, I think, 1024 characters if dealing with cmd.exe. Now, if cmd.exe was the Unix shell, it could take as many number of characters, but it's not. Once we have upload.asp, we have the ability to upload 10 files at a time. So we can just do browse, try and upload pwdump, and just say upload. Once we hit that, well, we've uploaded pwdump.exe. Now let's go to c.asp and try and run pwdump. C inet pub scripts, okay. Okay. When he tried to run pwdump, he got back nothing. Why? Because he's nobody, and it sucks to be nobody. So that's what we're going to try and do, is we're going to try to become somebody from nobody. Before we do that, let's just take a Unix example of how to pull this off if it's a Unix server. So go to this browser. Now since we can run arbitrary commands on Unix as well, what we're going to do that ls minus lar command. No, not that. No, wipe it back. Because I say so. Okay, just go to the main web page. You know, IE's caching really kills the whole demo because you can see all the stuff that we're going to do. Anyway, so just click on that page. Click on one of those, and in page is equal to pipe ls minus lar. Yeah, that one. Okay, what we're trying to do is trying to find a writable area where we can actually create files. Just do a view source. And scroll down. Okay, this site has a guest book directory, and if you notice, the guest book directory is owned by nobody, because that's where you can post applications into the guest book and create files over there. So we're going to try and create all the files in the guest book directory. So what we'll do is the following. We'll take the shell bin.sh and make a copy of bin.sh in the guest book directory, and then we'll straight away reference bin.sh from the web. So go back to the browser, and instead of ls minus lar, just type cp plus /bin/sh plus, no, not slash, sorry, bin.sh plus /user /local /apache /htdocs /guestbook /shell.cgi. We'll give it a CGI extension, otherwise Apache won't recognize this as an executable and just complain. So hit it. I'm sorry? I'm very happy. Okay. Now the file is copied over there, and now go to the just do a reload on that and see if it's made it there. Do a view source. Scroll down. There. At the last file we have shell.cgi, and that's still preserving the executable attributes. So now from a browser we can straight away reference 10.0.4.3/guestbook/shell.cgi and straight away fire command line arguments at that. Now just like we did post request to command.exe, we're going to do post request to shell.cgi. So go to the command window, please, and pull up this file, create in Notepad. File open. Yeah, create all cgi.txt. Yeah. Here I have all Perl code, which we're going to use echo greater than recreate Perl code on the target server. We're going to create a Perl library and then some Perl code. Just scroll to the very end. At the end, I also have a chmod plus x to make the code executable. That will save us an extra step. So once we run this, we'll have upload.cgi and shell.cgi recreated on the target server. So just go to demo. Yeah, that's it. Post underscore unix.pl. HTTP 10.0.4.3 slash guestbook slash shell.cgi. No, shell full. Space. Create all Unix. Create all CGI.txt, sorry. Create all CGI. Okay, there's a problem with that keyboard. Arthur, do you want to try and fix this keyboard? Is Arthur here? Okay, Arthur's our very good and dear friend. The key was stuck on the keyboard and he actually took a pen and stabbed my keyboard. And you should have, people who have seen my face at that time think was a priceless moment. But create all CGI.txt. Arthur's actually outside, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, just hit it. Okay, once we do this, well, Apache doesn't return back anything, but all the files have been created. Let's go to the browser and do a can we do a reload of that page? Go back. Yeah, there. Do a shift reload. Okay, and do a view source. Now in the guestbook directory, scroll down, you have 4 files at the very end, l.pl, sh.cgi, shell.cgi was a copy of the shell that we made, and upload.cgi. So now we're going to pull out those. So pull out, now go to 10.0.4.3 slash guestbook slash sh.cgi. Yeah, hit enter. And we type in, say, ID, hit run. And now we get command execution on Unix through the web. ID still shows us that we are nobody. Do an ls minus la. Yeah, we can get command execution going. So now comes the question of privilege escalation. Now, how do we escalate our privileges and get something meaningful out of this? But since we have 2 powerful tools with us, we have upload facilities and we have exec facilities. So all we got to do is pick out our favorite privilege escalation exploits, upload them, and fire them up. Of course, we have to make sure that these are non-interactive because you don't have TTY access or you don't have shell access directly. So that's exactly what we're going to do. On Unix, we have, there was the X restore exploit posted, which made use of the dump and restore bug to create a root shell. So we just took a copy of the C code. We're going to upload it and run it. So go to upload.cgi and do browse. There's a file called xrestore rh62. Yeah, open that, upload it. There it goes. Just open that file in Notepad. Just want to show how it is. It's C. Yeah. Oh, okay. Notepad doesn't do a very good job of displaying it. Yeah, we have WordPad, but what I wanted to just tell you, it's plain C code. We try and compile it using GCC, or we can straight away upload a precompiled binary. Now, just to make things interesting, we'll compile it on their server. So do sh.cgi. And say gcc -o xrestore space x restore underscore rh62.c. This is a cool thing with Unix. You have everything available at your disposal. Okay, the thing is compiled, and now we just do LSLA. There it is. We need to do a ch. Oh no, it's a chmod plus c already. We have that x restore binary. All we do is just execute it. So do a /x restore. Hit enter. It's run. And if it runs well, we will have a root shell lying in the temp directory. Just do a ls -la /tmp space tmp temp. Yeah. Okay, there we are. We have a root shell and it's suid. So once we run it, we'll get euid 0. And we'll also upload another file, which we have. So go to upload.cgi. Click browse. And there's a file called rootsh.cgi, which I've written. What it does is instead of running the commands directly, it runs the command using /tmp/root shell. So we'll have an suid web-based root prompt. Okay, and now you got to do rootsh.cgi. Hit it. Gives you an error because it's not chmod. So we go to sh.cgi. Do chmod 755 space rootsh.cgi. Run. Okay, now we can pull up rootsh.cgi straight from the browser. Yeah, hit it. And now type ID. And there you see your euid root, egid root. So that's when we get full root privileges on the server. Okay, let's try and do the same thing for Windows NT. Over here, we upload a classic exploit that JD wrote up. The exploit is one that has been disclosed recently. The IIS has a stub in itself called revert to self. Now, if this stub is invoked, IIS will reset the properties, reset the security context of the executing web app to that of itself, that of NT authority or NT system. Now, if this revert to self is available only with certain modules within IIS, certain DLL files. Most of these files are hard-coded with absolute paths. Excuse me. Although some files are not hard-coded, they're just left relative. And some of these files are files like idq.dll, ida.dll, to which this revert to self property is available. So what you do is a classic Trojan attack. You have code which you rename as idq.dll, and this code actually calls the revert to self thing, which will reset privileges to system. And that's what JD has helped write up. He already uploaded those files. He uploaded idq.dll, then he uploaded windump and windump system driver. He uploaded fpipe and fscan. What we're going to do now is invoke idq.dll, which will be invoking the Trojan. So once we invoke that, nothing comes back. But what will have happened is this Trojan adds the iuser and iwam into the administrators group. So now, whatever privileges your web application executes, it will execute with full admin privileges. So now we go to who am I, upload that, and now go to c.asp. Scroll to the bottom and do c-inet pub scripts who am I? Who am I will still show you that you are IWAM or iUser, but this has been added to the admin group. So if we do pwdump, in this case, we will get the password hashes thrown back to us as follows. So we have achieved full admin privileges on this target server. We can use we can use fscan that we just uploaded. Fscan is the quick and fast command line port scanner on Windows, written by JD at Foundstone. It's available from Foundstone site. We can do all sorts of things. We can take apart the backend network and go further. So this has effectively just using single HTTP requests and replies, we've been able to achieve almost interactive admin level or root level command execution on backend servers. So a firewall or SSL will not do anything to stop this. As far as the last goodie for the demos go, I want to show you another page that we can upload. Supposing the sites are running backend database servers, and we know that all the goods lie in the database servers, and we want to hack these up. What we can do is go to upload.asp and upload a page called sqlquery.asp. There we are. Let's do one thing. Go to scriptc.asp and take a look at the source code of a file. So do type c:\inetpub /www.root /showtable.asp. You want to see what databases are being used. And if you look at the source code of the application, we'll find out what databases are being used. Okay, there we have, notice the line con.open. Provider is equal to SQL OLE-DB, data source is localhost, catalog is called art, user ID is SA, password is blank. Is misconfigured server. People thought they wouldn't get in, but so they just left the SA password as blank. Just copy that string from provider equal to password is equal to. Yeah, just copy it and keep it in the clipboard. Okay, and we uploaded that page called sqlquery.asp. Let's just pull that up. Okay, sqlquery.asp is written by a friend of mine who works very closely with me and does a whole lot of web and e-commerce research. What we can do, what the script does is it takes in all the database parameters, opens up an ODBC connection using those parameters, and then allows you to run your custom SQL queries. Just paste that into the connection string. Don't do anything over there. Just wipe it out. Yeah. So what you do is take a look at the application, pull out the connection string, paste that whole string, not in query string, in connection string, up above. Yeah. And get rid of that last quote. Yeah. And over here, in the query string, yeah, just type select star from products. Products. Yeah, hit enter. So now we have a custom SQL prompt with us. So you use SQL queries, you get stuff thrown back into a nice table. You can aim this at any backend database on the target network. As long as you can pull out connection information, passwords, just plug them into these fields. Even partial information works. It'll try its best to establish a connection and pull out all the stuff into a web page. So not only select, you can do an insert into or drop table, depends on how many privileges you have. Instead of doing the connection string, you can also type in the IP yourself if you want to go ahead and guess. Here, let's type 127.0.0.1. Username is SA. Leave the password blank. Keep the database as master. And wipe that connection string out. Okay, in the driver, just click down on the driver list. Okay, driver, right now we've written this page for both SQL and Oracle. If we get some time, we'll write it for more database providers. So leave it SQL for now, and do select star from sys databases. Hit execute. So there we go. We get all the databases thrown back at us. Not only SQL queries, we can also run stored procedures because all these get passed in the same manner. Let's run sp_tables. Hit execute. So there you have all the tables in the master database thrown back. And you can even run xp command shell right here. xp_cmd shell space single quote, say ipconfig/all. Hit quote, close, execute. And well, you get the ipconfig results thrown back. Now, if this were another backend database on some other IP, all this stuff would run on that target database server. And effectively, you can just drive yourself through the whole network. So this was so far as all the demos were concerned. Let's just wind up the show with the remaining slides. Okay, we saw all this. How do we upload our tools and get root? Next slide. We saw the SQL prompt. And go ahead. WinDump. Let me just end by pointing out the root causes of all web attacks. Two most common elements in the universe, hydrogen and stupidity. Stupidity being responsible for most of the web attacks. Carelessness in programming and oversights. Sometimes application developers think functionality first, security later. More often than not, they're completely incompetent to develop web apps. And this is what I've seen out in the industry, is most people get hired on, they say, okay, we want to get our site up by Christmas, we want to get our shopping site up, let's go, let's try. If it takes 10 men, okay, employ 30 men. This is the whole story of the .com boom. And get them all to develop the site. Well, if you don't know how to develop a site, what can you do? You steal the code. You steal it from free sites like developer.com or take example CDs from books. Just make a few changes, paste it in, and off you go. You get your web app running. These are common causes where oversights such as lack of proper input validation, lack of checking for meta characters, lack of input sanitization, all these kind of errors would creep in. And these would cause stuff what we've seen over here. Sometimes web application architecture is so very complex. When you have multiple plugins and you have multiple platforms working together, it takes a lot of skill and a lot of caution to completely configure and lock down a whole web app. Sometimes if you lock something down, the backend database won't work, the XML component would fail. It takes, I mean, it's like, trying to balance so many things onto a fine line. And any oversights in these would allow things like this to happen. URL parsing and file canonicalization in web servers causes things like the Unicode bug, where the Unicode characters are not parsed correctly, and these would cause attacks to happen. Next slide. How do we avoid these things? First, we try to avoid stupidity. We use common sense and read and learn and know what we're doing. Take care. There are features such as Perl has a mode called taint mode, which does not allow meta characters in all the input fields, does not allow system calls. If such features are available to the platform being used, use them. These would be great. Try to follow the principle of least privilege, appropriate system restrictions, appropriate access rights and restrictions. Do not allow things more than what are necessary. Web applications and directories need to be thrown into a protected area and keep that area protected so that all execution only occurs in that directory context. It's not writable and things like that. Restricted outbound access and firewall helps. If you have SSL sites and you have only few people connecting, client-side certificates would help. But more often than not, thorough code checking and code reviews and QA is the only solution to web attacks. and preventing them. Next. And of course, to make sure that top management is well abreast of security issues, monitor mailing lists such as BugTrack. I don't know. Well, that's about it. We have around 10 minutes for questions and answers, and we'll be happy to address your QA right now. Any questions? Well then, thank you very much. Enjoy the beautiful November.